Hello, everyone. My name is Zena Harris, and I am the president of Green Spark Group and the creative director of the Sustainable Production Forum. And I'd like to welcome you all to the 2020 SPF presented by SIM. Things look a little different than past SPF events, but we are excited to still be able to offer this series of excellent virtual panel sessions over the next couple of weeks. Today is the first of 4 webinars that will cover a variety of topics centered around sustainable production. At Green Spark Group, our vision is to change the climate of entertainment. These webinars are our way of gathering thought leaders and experts on the topics to create a culture of change on production and throughout the industry. I would like to take a moment to quickly run through some of the instructions and Zoom features we have available. The chat box will be left open for general discussion among attendees throughout the panel discussion. This is where we will post any links and contact information mentioned during the event. The Q&A box at the bottom of your screen is your opportunity to ask the panelists questions. This Q&A box will be monitored throughout the event, so please direct your questions in that space. You are also able to upvote questions, and the moderator will prioritize those that are of interest to many attendees. Finally, the recording of the event will be shared with you afterwards. But before I pass you off to our moderator, I'd like to give a big thanks to our presenting sponsor of the 2020 Sustainable Production Forum, SIM. In addition, a big thank you to our Climate Narratives panel sponsor, IATSE 891. Here to provide a few remarks is Phil Clapwick from IATSE 891. Take it, Phil.
Thanks, Zena. First of all, I'd like to mention that I come to you from where I live and now work remotely on the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie and Kwantlen peoples. And I mention this and acknowledge that I come to you from a place of privilege. As Zena mentioned, I'm the business representative of IATSE Local 891. And I represent the 9,400 professional artists and technicians who make movie magic happen in British Columbia. We're proud supporters of the Sustainable Production Forum and the Real Green Initiative at Creative BC. In my role in the film industry, I've worked in the industry for 25 years. And I can tell you that absolutely everything begins with the story. Every decision that we make as filmmakers is based on the script, and it serves the director's vision. So if the story's so important and it's the reason we're all there, why not bake environmental issues right into the narrative? And that's why we're here today. And I'm excited to hear the panelists' discussion. I apologize in advance because I'll have to jump off fairly quickly. I've got a meeting with some of the BC Green Party candidates for the upcoming election. And I'm really thrilled that we have that option. Thank you very much to the Green Spark Group for driving the Sustainable Production Forum, and Zena Harris for your contributions, and also to our production partners at SIM for spearheading this important conversation. Zena?
All right. Let's get started with our moderator, Doug. Take it, Doug.
Thank you, Zena, and welcome everyone to the Climate Narratives panel. I'm excited and honored to be your moderator today. We have an excellent lineup of panelists, so let's get started. The Climate Narratives panel will explore how content creators for film and television include climate change and sustainable concepts in their stories. Panelists will share their lived experience and expertise within the industry, as well as connect the power of storytelling to cultural impacts. Your panelists today are, and they are some great ones, Rob Moore, Director, Water and Climate Team, Natural Resources Defense Council; Rhoda and Wainwright, Producer; Damon Gameau, Filmmaker; Cheryl Slean, Creative Strategist and Co-Founder, Rewrite the Future Program at the Natural Resources Defense Council; and Dr. Amy Brady, Editor-in-Chief of the Chicago Review of Books. To start us off is Rob Moore. Rob is the director of the Water and Climate Team at the NRDC. His work revolves around government policy and decision-making related to climate resilience and adaptation, sea level rise, flood risk, and disaster preparedness and response. Hey, Rob, welcome. You out there, Rob?
How about now?
I hear you now. All right, let's get started.
Okay, very
Rob.
sorry. Yeah,
okay.
pleasure to be here and be part of this wonderful panel on an issue that I really enjoy talking about, the role of narrative and storytelling, and how narrative and storytelling can really help not only inform the public and expand people's imaginations of what's possible and what's even happening right now, but also how can be used as a tool for swaying the actions of decision makers, whether that's people at the local government level or even members of Congress. So it's something that in the work my team does around climate adaptation, particularly around flooding and sea level rise, that we've tried to incorporate into some of our advocacy strategies. So in the time that I've got to kick this off, I wanted to share an example of how we've one example of how we've tried to use storytelling and narrative to both illustrate the real world impacts of these issues, as well as some of the policy solutions that we're talking about. So let's watch a video that somebody who's skilled at these things produced.
1997, in 2006, in 2013, and in 2015. It put our lives on pause. Standing from the front porch, the water came up to here. So all of this was covered.
So imagine living in a home that's flooded every 2 to 3 years, and what a hardship that would be on you and your family. Through the National Flood Insurance Program, we know there are about 30,000 properties that flood repeatedly. You know, on average, these properties have flooded about 5 times. But because of climate change and the resultant sea level rise and increase in flooding on inland waterways that we'll experience in this country, millions of people are going to find themselves in this identical situation.
And this is where the water just kept coming. It travels all the way to my home.
So we need to make it easier for people to move out of the areas that are at the greatest risk of flooding. So one of the core problems of the National Flood Insurance Program is it's primarily designed to help people rebuild in the same place and in the same vulnerable location. Another shortcoming of the current system is that people have a very limited ability to find out the flood history of a property that they live in, or perhaps they're renting, or even purchasing. So the end result of these two problems is that it can unintentionally trap homeowners in a situation nobody really wants to be in.
I want to make sure you get a very clear picture about the water that came into my home. It was 18 to 20 inches every single time. When I reached this point, the water was all the way up to the 3rd step. In the family room downstairs, when it flooded, there was carpeting down there, so we took the carpeting up and we put linoleum down. And then the next time it flooded, we had to take that up and we put tile down. The last time it flooded, I'm not doing anything. It's concrete, so we just painted the floor. This is where the water came up. We had to cut out the drywall there. So we didn't replace the drywall here because we felt like it was a waste of time, a waste of money, because it's just going to get flooded again.
Currently, assistance is available to help people move to a less vulnerable location. But these efforts aren't particularly well funded. For the people that are interested, it can be years of waiting before they find out if their home is actually going to be purchased. And all that time, you know, they're left wondering, is my house going to flood again before I'm able to actually move somewhere else?
You know, I have mounds and mounds of paper, and I'm still waiting. I am still waiting.
What NRDC has proposed is to allow people to lock in a guarantee of assistance to relocate in the future. What that means is after a flood causes substantial damage to their property, they would immediately get an expedited buyout of their home. So instead of having to go through the pain of rebuilding their property and wondering if a buyout might be offered later, they would already have that process underway. Our proposal would also give the homeowner a right to know the past history of flooding on their property. They'd be much better informed about the potential for flooding in the future.
Just 3 doors down, there's a house that also flooded a lot, just as many times as my home has flooded. And they were able to kind of maneuver through the system, and now that home has been removed. When they acquired that home, they knocked it down and turned it into green space. And that's what it should be here. It should be just green space.
So this is a problem that can't be avoided and can't be ignored. We're going to be spending hundreds of billions of dollars to repeatedly rebuild properties that are inevitably going to be flooded over and over again. And that's just not sustainable.
You know, that property that we purchased back in 1986 that we thought was such a wonderful, tranquil, lovely place. It's a nightmare to live here with the thought and the anticipation that it is going to flood again. And I don't want other people to have to go through this.
Hey, Rob, this is Doug. Are you going to close this out, or are we moving on? Yeah.
Yeah.
We are.
So I just want to, that's a video that we shot to help tell the story, a representative story of something that tens of thousands of people, if not more, in the United States are already going through, largely as a result of climate change. The woman in the video is named Olga McKissick. She's a resident of the Louisville, Kentucky area. And after we shot this in 2017, she had been trying to find a buyout of her home for years. And in 2019, her home flooded yet again, believe it or not, for the 5th time. And she was still in the midst of trying to secure government assistance to get her home bought out so she could move somewhere much safer, which finally came through last summer. And her house was finally purchased and enabled her to relocate. But you know, this video has been a really powerful way of telling people about the challenges that are already facing people throughout the nation and are going to affect millions more in the future. So, anyway, thanks for letting me share that, and look forward to talking more with the other panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. What a fantastic video. Just a heads up, Rob will not be able to join us for the remainder of the panel session, but Rob, we're thankful for you making the time today in your garage. Thank you. We get to see your nice bike there. All right, so next up is Rhoda and Wainwright. Rhoda is a film director, writer, and producer in Madrid with more than 15 years of professional experience behind her in the editorial, film, television, and advertising world. She has specialized in different disciplines of the cinematographic process, such as production, direction, and screenwriting. Her works have been awarded and selected in dozens of international festivals around the world. Welcome, Rhoda. Join him.
Hello, thank you, Doc. Really nice to be here in this panel. I'm also the co-founder of Fiction Changing the World, a production and consultancy company based in Madrid, Spain, and we are specialized in sustainable audiovisual productions. We have created a new audiovisual movement called Dante, and its purpose is to create pieces of fiction that convey humanity's greatest goals to society as a whole. But it's tricky when you use fiction to convey important messages because usually people don't believe what they see on films and series. And I mean, that's actually a good thing. You shouldn't try to pass a biology exam based on what you learn on the latest Grey's Anatomy episode, right? So in order to make the audience trust what they see on a Dante film or series, we needed a methodology. And that's why the Dante movement has a decalogue that will guide you through the process of writing a Dante project. And one of the main requirements of this decalogue is that screenwriters and experts should work together in the writer's room. So together they can find a balance between entertainment and rigorous and accurate data based on the largest scientific consensus. If you follow the methodology, your production will be endorsed by the Dante seal, and that seal will also allow the audience to know that when they're watching a Dante film or series, they will not only have fun and be entertained, but they will also learn important pieces of information that will help them lead a more sustainable life. We want to inspire people. We want to make a call to action. And that's why we believe it's very important that our narratives don't only focus on dystopic futures or apocalyptic scenarios, but also give examples of how to prevent those scenarios and give examples of things you can do on your day-to-day life to be more sustainable. The audiovisual industry has the power to reach massive audiences. And with that power comes a great responsibility. And we believe we should embrace that responsibility by using our content to actually make a difference and tackle important issues such as climate change. We are also very happy that last month, United Nations selected the Dante movement to be part of the SDG Action Zone as one of the most innovative and impactful initiatives that our planet needs. And I will like to take this opportunity to invite all of you filmmakers, screenwriters, producers, broadcasters, investors, to join the Dante movement and to help us change the world one story at a time. Thank you, Doc.
All right, great, fantastic. Thank you, Rhoda. And again, let me encourage the people watching this out there, if you're scribbling down questions and such, don't forget to type those in and we'll be monitoring that. All right, so next up is Damon Gameau, joining us from Australia. Damon is a director, producer, author, and actor starring in several feature films and performing in a variety of television shows. Damon has recently completed the documentary 2040, which looks at what the world could look like in 2040 if all the best solutions that exist today were implemented right now. He has kindly provided us with exclusive access to the film, which will be available on the Sustainable Production Forum website after this webinar. Good day, Damon.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's very early in the morning here in Australia on Friday. I'm sorry I have missed most of the webinar so far. I was on another call, but I think I get the gist of what you require from me. I have made a film recently. It was released in Australia in the middle of last year called 2040, and it's ostensibly a letter to my daughter who is 4, showing her what the world could look like in 2040 if some of the best ecological solutions were implemented in this moment. So I call it an exercise in fact-based dreaming. Everything I show her in 2040 has to exist now in some form. It isn't sort of an exercise in bad parenting and utopian thinking. It's very much extrapolating all of the best things that we already have in this moment. And I think the audience really took away from it that we do have everything we need right now. We're not waiting for some miracle solution or invention or technology. We have everything in this moment, and that's been very encouraging for people. The motivation for me making it was being a father. My daughter was 2 at the time when I started researching, and I just felt I was very well equipped to tell her how bad things are and how dystopian the future was looking. As we know, most of our Hollywood films depict that future devoid of nature, robots everywhere, we're living in slums. And I thought, I don't have the tools or arsenal to explain to her the things we can do. What are those solutions? So I spent 5 years making the film, teaming up with lots of different experts around the world, and felt my own spirits lift and change as I did that research and started to discover these solutions, and thought, really, these need amplification. We need to bring this narrative into the climate narrative. It's important to sound the fire alarm, no doubt about it, but we've also got to show people where the exits are, and we haven't been doing that. So I think there just needs to be that balance. And so the film really is set up, the structure is quite interesting in that I go and find a particular solution. We look at energy, transport, agriculture, ocean, resources, and then I jump to the future and show my daughter what she would look like in 2040, how life would be affected by that solution, how it would impact her day-to-day life. And that was a really important element for us, was to take the climate discussion out of just facts and statistics and using terms like anthropogenic and negative emissions and things that don't stir the soul for people, and really get them to see what it would be like if we implemented these solutions. Can we imagine what life could be like on the other side of this crisis? and not tell a story of depravity and sacrifice of the things we have to surrender, but tell a story about how wonderful things could be, or how much better things could be if we strengthen our communities, if we had local decentralized energy, if our food was coming from healthy, clean soils. All these things people need to know because they're not aware of it right now. They're just told how bad things are. And I guess the thing I'm the most proud of with the film, we've now released it in many countries around the world, hasn't been the reception to the film. It's been the engagement of the public after they've seen the film. So we work very hard on crafting an impact campaign off the back of the film, where a card comes up at the end of the screening, and people get to go to our website and activate their own plan. And instead of being prescriptive there and saying to people, you know, eat less meat, ride your bike to work, change your light globes, we work with an organization to ask people a series of 6 or 7 questions based on their specific passion. So when they watched the film, what lit up them? Did they love to investigate more? What particular solution resonated with them? And then we provide 6 or 7 ways for them to get involved and get active. We teamed up with 50 different organizations around the world. And our community has brought to life many of the solutions that we show in the film. So we have an episode there about marine permaculture, which is a seaweed technology that sequesters huge amounts of carbon. And our community we raised $1 million just to build that first platform. That's getting built now in Tasmania, which wouldn't have happened unless the community got engaged, were given a solutions narrative. The same goes for microgrid. We did an equity crowdfund that raised over $1 million of people getting to own that microgrid solution. And we've had 1 million students in Australia be taught curriculum materials now, because 25,000 teachers downloaded those materials because they were looking for solutions. They were looking for positive stories that they could teach the children and inspire them about what careers they might have in the future. And so many children have written to us now and said, you know, we're just sick of sitting in class and hearing that there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2030. That there's going to be horrible climate change. We want to know what we can do about it. So I think this is a call, I think, for all storytellers in this moment to really engage. And this is the way we're going to disseminate that science. And I often lament that there's no, where are the musicians singing about this right now? We need more poets. We need more artists. These are the people that infuse that science into the culture and make it more relatable and translate it for people. Because I think sometimes we have got lost in that academic speak. So I'm a huge advocate for passionate storytelling. And in my country, you know, we've had lots of discussions here with various broadcasters and filmmakers as well about starting to really ramp this stuff up and make it more present, and not just show the apocalyptic huge firestorms and floods, but also highlight the people that are rolling up their sleeves and doing wonderful things, because that's how we're going to inspire other people and motivate them. As I said, we're a species that's evolved to tell stories, not to read endless graphs, facts and logic. So yep, happy to take any questions, but it's certainly been a wonderful journey the last 5 years, and we're not stopping yet. We're going to continue spreading the word.
Okay, great. Thank you, Damon. We're going to have some questions at the end of the introduction of the panel. And if you're following the chat, the access will be sent in an email to see Damon's movie 2040. So be on the lookout for that. And I just want to point out, Juan Pablo had this great comment. 2040 feels like the best movie of 2020, and we certainly need it this year. So great comment, Juan Pablo. All right, next up is Cheryl Slean. Cheryl is a climate communicator, playwright, and filmmaker with a diverse academic background in physics, literature, and sustainability. Wow. Okay, she is currently the creative director of Rewrite the Future, a climate storytelling and entertainment initiative at NRDC. Welcome, Cheryl.
There we go. Got to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Doug. Thanks to the Sustainable Production Forum for having us, for doing this topic. And I'm really inspired so far by what I've heard. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Rewrite the Future program at NRDC. Our Climate Narratives in Entertainment program arose a couple of years ago from the simple question of, why aren't we seeing more representations of the climate crisis and sustainable solutions on fiction TV shows and in narrative films? It just seemed like a big omission, especially, you know, given this time of this obvious and intensifying climate impacts and the incredible growth of the climate movement. So it just seemed like a big missed opportunity to us from a social change standpoint. And, you know, asking that question for me was really just the latest in a series of questions that I'd been asking myself as a playwright and filmmaker and a climate organizer, questions about how to engage the imaginative, as Damon was mentioning, the imaginative culture-making power of the arts and artists into the climate movement. And a few years ago, I ended up co-producing a multidisciplinary arts festival in LA, concurrent with the Paris Accords. It was to not only raise awareness with a broader audience, but to invite artists to experiment with how their work might have change-making intention and become like a form of activism, while still being true to their voice and their vision. So after the festival, we were doing some workshops in this vein with playwrights and performance artists, where we responded to climate science and sustainability theory and practice. And some interesting work came out of it that, you know, like a few people saw because it's the arts, right? And so, but here we were in LA, where playwrights are often screenwriters. And it occurred to me that it might be good to get Hollywood interested and on board with this stuff, with its immense cultural influence around the world. And right around that time, I was introduced to Daniel Heinerfeld of NRDC, who was doing documentaries over there and thinking along the same lines. So we joined forces to look into this question of how come there's no climate on our entertainment screens? And we started off with a solid period of field research, where we talked to a bunch of Hollywood professionals, creatives and executives about their views on climate content, climate storytelling, as well as we met with groups doing social impact storytelling around other issues. And we also dipped our toe into the fairly large body of academic research on media impact, narrative psychology, entertainment, education, and so on. And a sort of working theory of change emerged from that research and a program to try to activate that theory that we call Rewrite the Future. And our mission is basically to inspire and support more and more diverse climate and sustainability content in entertainment storytelling, which of course involves working with the industry's sort of acculturated resistance to that content. And not just more climate stories, but more effective ones. The kind of content that Damon was referring to that might help shift our cultural climate narratives away from denial, complacency, and despair to an empowered sort of mass movement toward climate action at scale. And it's an open question, what kinds of stories might help with that shift? But studies have shown that narratives are more effective at addressing resistance to attitude and behavior change than more traditional, overtly educational methods. Because when people are transported by a good story, they're put into this psychological state where they're more likely to open their minds to new ideas and new ways of living. And we have seen entertainment help move public opinion in the past. For example, the Mary Tyler Moore Show back in the 70s on women in the workplace, or Will and Grace on LGBTQ rights. I like to cite Black Panther and its Afrofuturism, which I see as very effectively anti-racist. And these and other hit shows and films have helped people to articulate, understand, and normalize their feelings about social developments that challenge the status quo. They've reached huge audiences, become societal shorthands, and they've shifted prevailing cultural attitudes. So legislative and policy wins follow with that shift of zeitgeist, and our world changes. So how might this apply to climate? Our program is educational. It's also experimental and explorative. We are definitely building the car as we're driving it. And it is centered around a climate story consultation process that is tailored to each film or TV project. it's got to be custom tailored because there are so many possible angles to climate or sustainability that might pertain to a story's unique situation or setting or characters and so on. But there are some top level messages that run through every consultation too, that came out of the common themes of climate resistance we saw again and again when we were talking to people in Hollywood. I'll just name one or two here because we're going to be talking more. So I'm just going to, there's a few, but they're really kind of in these patterns. For one thing, entertainment makers seem to be afraid that climate and sustainability topics will turn off audiences by being boring or preachy or like too factual or scientific, as Damon said, or politically polarizing. And we counter that misapprehension by encouraging them to just keep doing what they're doing. Lead with entertainment. Good stories, well told, and hits are going to reach more people, move more people, and transport more people. So you can forget about the fear of being educational or polemical. That's going to backfire anyway. Just keep making entertainment, good stories, well told. And so another question that comes up is, how do I tell a story about a complex global problem like climate change? So partly this is a problem with the term climate change. It's an umbrella term that is seen as very broad and scientific. So we break it down to this: just keep telling stories about people. All stories are about people. People made global warming, people are impacted by it, and people are solving it too, in all kinds of thrilling and heartwarming ways. And so, you know, as with any storytelling, character is a primary way to integrating climate content. There's a lot more I could say about these resistances and how to approach, you know, like the many different kinds of climate storytelling. Just quickly, some ideas that we will bring up in our consultations are just like characters. You know, your characters could talk and feel about climate just like we do. Why not get that on screen? Why not get that into your stories? Just talking about it is better than ignoring it wholesale. Characters can do work that's dealing with climate impacts and engaged in solutions. And the dramatic work of saving the world, it's like the biggest story of our time. And then all the possibilities, of course, for intersectional stories, climate impacts to health, frontline communities bearing the brunt and becoming empowered agents of change. And across genre, comedies, some comedies are starting to experiment with climate in their storytelling. So this is the kind of stuff we talk about with writers, producers, and also the executives, the folks who are choosing what you and I will see. And we, of course, connect creatives with content experts. We have a whole bunch of wonderful ones like Rob, who you heard from earlier at NRDC, to make sure that their characters and events are grounded in fact, but also as a source of cool and specific ideas for their stories. And I'll just end with this specific example. We're working with an upcoming show from one of the major streamers that is set in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. That's the DMV for short. And we turn to some of our great NRDC policy folks who are working on solving climate problems in those areas, like urban heat islands and food deserts and air pollution that disproportionately harms lower income urban families of color, like the characters in this show. And the producers were particularly interested in portraying community empowerment and local solutions. And so we were able to point them to some really great groups and great work being done on the ground out there on heat equity and green spaces and food resiliency. And the show, extra cherry on top, they wanted to give back to the communities they were shooting in on location. And so these organizations, they are able to directly support them, which is awesome. So just quickly, besides our story consulting, we also produce events, and this might fit in with what Damon was saying. We have an upcoming climate narratives webinar called Beyond Apocalypse, Alternative Climate Futures in Film and TV, where we'll explore with a couple of climate experts and a couple of storytellers the range of possible futures we might have, depending on the choices we make today and the role of stories in helping us imagine and desire and move towards those better futures and show us how to get from here to there. So that's just a quick overview of what we are doing in Rewrite the Future at NRDC. And I will post a link to some more information in the chat. Thank you all so much.
All right, great. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, so our final panelist today is Dr. Amy Brady. Amy is an award-winning editor-in-chief of the Chicago Review of Books, deputy publisher of Guernica magazine, and the co-editor of House on Fire, an anthology of personal essays about climate change forthcoming from Catapult. She's also been my personal climate fiction mentor. Welcome, Amy.
Hey, Doug, thank you so much for having me. And thank you too to SPF for having me a part of this panel. It's a thrill to be here. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I know we only have so much time today, so I'll keep my introduction fairly short. As Doug mentioned, I edit the Chicago Review of Books, where for the last few years, I have edited a monthly column called Burning Worlds. And the purpose of that column is to explore how contemporary literature, in terms of novels, short stories, and even some poetry, is giving narrative shape to the climate crisis. It has been such an incredible journey learning about how contemporary writers are responding to climate change, as well as just learning historically how storytellers have responded to climate. The concept of climate fiction in literature is not new. It's been around since at least the 1960s, and mostly in the realm of science fiction. But around 2010 or so, something really interesting happened. And novelists of all stripes, not just sci-fi writers, but fantasy writers, even romance writers, folks who write in the realm of what some people might call literary, or what I call realist fiction, they also started creating these complex, beautiful, and emotionally ranging stories about climate change. Very recently, there has started to be some more psychological and sociological studies about how climate fiction is actually affecting its readership. And what these early studies have shown is that folks who read climate fiction do in fact become a bit more progressively minded about climate change. In other words, they start to take it a little bit more seriously. Folks are also more likely to talk about climate change with friends and family with whom it's been difficult to talk about climate change in the past. And those conversations often start by them simply handing a work of climate fiction to that family member so that they have a common reference point for you. So that's very exciting for a giant book nerd like me. But I have to say that even though here in 2020, when there are more people reading novels than at any other point in history, there is a limit to the readership of novels. Even someone like me who reads at least a couple of books a week, there are some nights where I would just rather turn on the television, or I would rather go to the movie theater. Or let's say I'd rather go to the movie theater in the before times. Hopefully that's coming again sometime soon. So it's just a fact that storytelling about climate change on the large and small screens are going to reach a much wider audience. And so my research has started to take me into that realm as well, and to learn as much as I can about how audiences have been responding to television and movies about climate change. And what a lot of that research has shown is that in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways, climate fiction and literature is just a little bit ahead of the game. And what I mean by that is that there is so much more experimentation going on. These stories are so much more character driven, and they are just kind of involved in these different types of tropes and narrative shapes, many of which Cheryl described earlier, that are having a positive impact on readers. Meanwhile, the stories that are happening on screen, some psychologists have shown that they might actually make viewers just a tiny bit more resistant to the idea or fearful of the idea of climate change. And so what that says to somebody like me is that there is an incredible opportunity here to mine the work of climate fiction to find some incredible material that can be adapted for the big screen, because the stories are already out there. It's just time to bring them to a bigger audience. And so in my role at the Chicago Review of Books, at Guernica, and on panels like this, I have become an advocate for bringing more folks together to have conversations about the potential for that type of adaptation work happening. So I promised I would keep this short, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. But thank you again, everyone, for having me here, and I am very excited to be a part of this conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amy. And thanks to all the panelists. That was fantastic hearing your background on all this. And now the fun part where we're opening it up to questions. And I'm going to kick it off with a question of my own, but then we're getting questions where you guys can all submit your questions and you can actually go in and vote for particular questions. So I encourage you, as you're hearing these answers and such, keep putting up questions and going in and vote for the ones that you want me to ask. All right, so I'm just going to kick this off. And this is a question the whole panel can ask, and we don't necessarily have to go through the whole panel, but I want to hear, just to get some context, and maybe Damon, want to start off with you. Do you have any examples of storytelling in movies or TV about climate change that you feel were really effective? Just thinking about what's already out there.
No, and that's why I made 2040, I think, was because I think, as was just alluded to, that the narrative has inherently been dystopian, and filmmakers have stuck to that. And I understand why. Like, I guess that there's this idea of urgency, and let's wake people up and let's remind them of what needs to be done. But I spoke to an environmental psychologist very early in my research process, and she talked about us having this sort of window of tolerance where humans can only take so much before we sort of disengage. And given the world we're in right now and how saturated we are with this kind of content, that it is very hard for people after a busy day at work, they juggle the kids, to then expect them to sit down and watch an hour film about the reefs dying. I mean, it is a big ask. Some of us will do it because we're very engaged. So that, for me, that was, I found myself in that same position. I couldn't complete an article about a coral bleaching here in Australia in 2016. And I turned the page, and then as I was reading the next article, I thought, why did I stop reading that? I mean, I'm a father with a young daughter. Why couldn't I connect there? And that's when I started this whole process, to find out smarter ways of trying to engage people and bring them in, not through fear and overwhelm and anxiety, which does trigger parts of our brain, which shut down the other parts that creatively think and problem solve. And how do we actually kickstart that other part of our brain? So I was frustrated there was no films out there that I could find, and other people might be aware of them, that were presenting a different future. And as I've said before, any Hollywood film, if it's set in the future, is dystopian. It's a horrible world. It's invariably devoid of nature. So I think we need to have an intervention on that, because these are the images that we are planting into the subconscious of our children. And if we're not careful, they will march into that future just thinking that's what the future is going to be. But it doesn't have to be. That's why I wanted to show rooftop gardens and cleaner air and these completely different cities that we can live in. So I hope that there is a ramping up of that, not just in documentaries, but as a backdrop to sci-fis in the future. Why not set them in these really sustainable, beautiful worlds? We can still have drama and conflict there, but the world itself doesn't have to be crumbling. So I really hope we start to shift to that in the coming years.
Okay, I want to ask a couple more panelists the same question. And Rhoda, let's jump to you. Are there any particular TV shows or movies that you think have been effective with the climate change message? And I think, to Damon's point, either positive or negative, it can be effective either way.
I also don't believe there's a great example of positive impact through a climate change narrative in films or series, or at least I haven't found one yet. But sometimes I like to mention The Day After Tomorrow as an example of what it could have been done with such a big blockbuster if they only had gotten the science right. This is a movie that was seen all around the world. It was really entertaining. It was very spectacular. They took this actual science fact that if the Earth temperature raises 1.5 degrees Celsius more, then the Atlantic current will stop. But then the Northern Hemisphere would never freeze in like a day or two. It was spectacular. It was great for the movie, but if they had just consulted with experts, they could have provided them with other scenarios, other really amazing, impressive scenes to shoot that would have conveyed a real factual message, no? And that was a movie that everybody saw and everybody enjoyed. And if they only had gotten that a bit further and used the science right, it could have made a really great impact, no? At least to inform people and to maybe lead them to think about other things like, do the people I vote consider climate change an important issue? Can I do something about it? No, I mean, I don't think the role of fiction is to educate people, but just to raise awareness. It is to spark a conversation, a discussion, to make you leave the theater or with some questions in your mind, spark that curiosity and that thirst for knowledge and to see what you can do, you know? So not regarding climate change, but yes, in other areas, like Cheryl said, like Show, Will and Grace, there's amazing studies by some universities in the States that prove that that show helped reduce the prejudice against LGBTQ community. So we know we can impact people in a positive way. It's just not been done yet with climate change.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rhoda. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are actually collecting examples because it's really helpful to offer to any existing examples. And we're seeing a bit of an uptick, you know, since we started this program where it was basically crickets out there. We are starting to see, you know, there is a time lag when it comes to development in Hollywood. So, but we are starting to see some shows, TV shows especially, starting to address the climate in different ways, and sometimes in, you know, with a range of what I would assess as good or bad effect, you know. But let me just mention a couple of the good ones. One is, you know, you would think like a show that has a political milieu, like The Politician. It's a, you know, streaming show on Netflix. That they did the season 2 that came out a few months ago is like the main character is running for Senate on a climate action platform. And so they get it really pretty right in terms of how they portray climate activists. And they also dip in various episodes to things like plastics in the ocean and going vegan. And they do it with lightheartedly, and it's really great. I recommend that. There's also a storyline, it's like a B plot in this latest season of Billions, which is about the finance industry on Wall Street. And we've got a character in there starting an impact investing arm of this investment firm. So there's the whole thread about that, which is pretty interesting. It's the first time I've ever seen that on TV. And then there was one other I was going to mention. Comedy. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia did an episode called The Gang Solves Global Warming. And they did their whole satirical take on what those crazy folks are doing in a heat wave in Philadelphia at the bar. It's pretty funny. So, I mean, you know, there's a range. I think there's a range of how you can approach it. Our tack when we're working with folks is like, there is no show or film that takes place in the recent past to the now to the future that can't bring in sustainability or climate in some way, even in small ways.
Thank you, Cheryl. And you know what, I'm going to have to, Amy, let's get you to answer that question too. And I know just as you were talking about it, you were talking about, you know, actual writing and fiction that actually could be effective, but is there any TV or film that you've been following that you think really stands out?
Well, Cheryl mentioned some great examples. You know, I might also add that all iterations of Star Trek have also had their various episodes dedicated to climate change, sustainability issues, you know, and various analogs that apply to a future in space. So those have been really good. But you know, yeah, but I think for the most part though, I think all of us agree that there is just a dearth of good positive impact storytelling in this realm. And you know, just to kind of come back to my point earlier though, there's great stories out there. I saw somebody in the comments mention solar punk. You know, that is a very recent, you know, emerging kind of subgenre of climate fiction that has proven to be very popular and very positive. And I think that bringing some of those tropes and narrative shapes to the big screen could just have an incredible impact.
All right, great. Thanks, Amy.
I would love to just jump in and say one more thing, because I see that there is something in the chat about Indigenous storytelling. So I just wanted to bring attention to this really popular, super popular show with Kevin Costner in it called, what's it called, you guys? Yellowstone. And, you know, it's about ranchers and whatnot and money and this and that. But there is this really strong storyline about the Native Americans and the tribes in that area, and their attitudes about the land and land use and caring for the land, like those values are really strongly portrayed in the story as antithetical to the sort of, you know, development voices, the pro-development voices, and it's really powerful. So like on that level, you know, like the underlying values and worldviews that are systems-based, that support, you know, the sustainable transition are really important to convey as well. And that show does it pretty well, amazingly.
All right, great. And yeah, if you haven't been checking out just the various chats, there's a lot of great material that's coming up there. Appreciate everybody kind of weighing in. And then we have the questions and people are voting. I'm going to go to a question from that. And so from Randy Cruz, and not everyone on the panel, I don't think will be able to answer this, but I think if you can answer a variation of it, is I'm interested to know whether anyone on the panel has worked with the major Hollywood studios on sustainable product placement opportunities beyond narratives. Are clean tech, circular economy products being explored? And I think that question could be relevant if you're just a filmmaker. It doesn't have to necessarily be Hollywood. So anybody want to take a first crack at that? Maybe Damon, with your own experiences in filmmaking, is like sustainable product placement.
Well, I'm sort of been in the documentary space, so that would sort of compromise the integrity of a documentary if I started.
Come on.
But look, I think there is potentially room for that. I mean, we get sent things sort of every day now of people coming up with really interesting ideas and people using products with genuinely biodegradable materials that can be put straight into your pot, and people doing all sorts of composting. So I think, you know, there is the opportunity for that, to start shifting that money away from investment in sort of degenerative practices to regenerative ones. We need that to happen. So I don't think we can be too precious about some of that stuff, whatever it takes in this moment to get people moving, to shift some of that capital is what we need to do. So I don't know, I'm working on another project at the moment with Paul Hawken on something, and we're talking about that at the moment about, you know, do we open ourselves up to, you know, these banks that are being ethical right now and are looking to do the right thing? Do we just switch that advertising model to try and incentivize and alert people to these organizations that are doing the right thing for climate? So just not trying to be too precious and perfect in this moment, because I think that perfect will cripple us if we try and chase that perfectionism.
All right, so maybe, but anyone else on the panel want to take a crack at that, Rhoda?
I haven't worked with sustainable product placement myself, but I met a company in France, a sustainable firm, early this year, and they're dedicated exclusively to that in the French film industry. They're called Pixetic, and they find sustainable companies that would like to support the film industry and be and have their products placed in their fictions. And I believe this is a great opportunity also for the industry to find sustainable finance and new incomes, but also supporting sustainable companies. It should be like a circular thing, right? You should make your production sustainable, ask your providers to be sustainable, and if you have product placement, try to make it as sustainable as possible. No, so we cannot be preaching and telling all this information about climate change and not apply it to ourselves and the decisions we make during the production process, right?
Great. Cheryl, were you wanting to take a crack at that?
Oh, well, I just wanted to mention that the folks putting on this conference would have a lot to say about that topic, because that is Green Spark, you know, I think that is their role. Like one of the things they're doing is giving, you know, creating ways for filmmakers to have more sustainable sets. But I feel like this whole green product placement thing is actually a few years ahead in the game from climate storytelling, like integrating stuff into narratives. It's all of the major studios have sustainability departments. They're greening their studios and their physical plants and also their processes of production. It's underway. There's a division of the Producers Guild called PGA Green that works with that, and then there's a company called Green Product Placement. So it's been happening. There's a few things happening, even more in Europe, from what I understand, as Rhoda mentioned, in England, in the UK. So that is happening, and my question always is, I mean, I think it's great, way better to have people driving electric cars, you know, than not, but you know, from my point of view, it's like, how much impact does that have on the viewer? There's so much information in the frame, like your eye is drawn as the viewer to where the action is. So if the sustainable product is involved in the character that you're following with your eyes and your emotions in their actions, then you're going to notice it. If it's just like, you know, a cup in the background, maybe not. But I don't know. I mean, I sure see every single plastic bottle in every set, you know, on every movie and TV. That really bugs me.
All right, so I have a question for Amy, and I want to merge two questions that I have. And one came from Alyssa Costello, and I'd love to hear more about the work being done with fiction writers. And, you know, just a question I had is, would cli-fi novels make for good TV film adaptations? So there's that similarity. What's in the pipeline, Amy? What would you think would be good?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I mean, you know, the thing about a novel, of course, and I'm sure anybody can see this who has seen a film adaptation of a novel, is that you have 300 pages of text that has to be condensed to an hour and a half to a 2-hour approximately long story. And so necessarily there will be things that would have to change. But what's going on right now in climate fiction is that we are seeing fewer dystopian tales and more, I hesitate to say utopian visions, because you know, it's not like novelists are you know, just suddenly saying, well, you know, everything is hunky-dory in 20 years. That's not the case at all. But there are many more depictions of collective action, of systemic change at the social level, at the economic level, with you know, a kind of a global shift in thinking about consumerism and about colonialism and all these other widespread drivers of climate change. And they're doing so in such a way that it's still a very engaging story. There was a novel that just came out this month by the great sci-fi writer Kim Stanley Robinson called The Ministry for the Future, which you know, is a mix of despair and hope, you know, that ultimately leads to a much more almost eco-socialist future where that is much more sustainable and fair to people around the world. And it's a really engaging story, albeit occasionally a heartbreaking one. I think something that's kind of important to get that not lose in this conversation is that a focus just on hope and just on happiness and utopia isn't necessarily going to be effective either, because that's not the way the real world works. You know, human beings don't feel just one thing at a time, and we certainly don't walk through the world with a Pollyannish view of the world. So I think it's important to bring in all of those emotions, and climate fiction is really good at doing that.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Are there any other panelists that have read any, you know, maybe you're reading some screenplays, or you read a climate fiction novel that you think would make a good movie or TV show? Maybe Rhoda?
Well, actually, we're working on on the development of a TV series right now, and well, we're working on several of them, and I'm also trying to answer one of the questions I was posting in the chat, because they're asking how specific or how centered it has to be the plot on climate change. And we have an example of one that is centered on climate change, and the location and the jobs of all the main characters have to do with renewable energies, and that's what they're doing in very extreme conditions. And each episode has a action thriller-based plot, but also their personal relationships. And since they're working in renewable energies, we have the chance to put a lot of messages about climate change and how important this transition and energetic transition is. But also we're working on other genres like comedy, like family comedy or romantic comedies, where we put these messages in through showing some behaviors, like Cheryl Slean was explaining, no? Or Amy. Why does the cool kid have to drive a muscle car? Why if he drives an electric car, right? There's also a good example of that in 21 Jump Street, the movie a few years ago with Channing Tatum. And it was great. The cool kids in high school now no longer think muscle cars are cool because their CO2 emissions are very high. So if we start changing those concepts, if we start showing other behaviors that, and start showing that that's actually something nice and something cool, a role model that you can emulate, then we will achieve the impact that we need to. So you can be very specific and you can center your plot all around climate change, or you can also do it in subplots of the episodes or the film that you're shooting or writing, and also achieve that impact, because it works. Behavioral science has been telling us for a long time this works, and we should listen to them.
All right, great. And so I want to jump to a different question here, and this is directly for Damon. I love this question. And how has your daughter been affected by your 5-year journey in making your film?
Well, actually, she hasn't seen it yet, which is I probably need to think about, because all of her friends at school have seen it, and I've just sort of been a bit reticent to show her. I'm probably a bit nervous because it's a deeply personal story for me. But no, most children, as we know these days, are quite, especially my country, very aware of climate change, especially after our fires that were so catastrophic here, that, they understand the concepts. She sort of gets it. She's only 6, but understands that it's basically about polluted air, and that isn't good, and things aren't going well. But like I said, I feel very confident now that I've got a lot of things I can tell her about what is going on, and she understands what my work is, and that I'm proud to tell her that there are millions of humans that care about this and are doing incredible things. And I think that message is what we need to get to our children, that a lot of them are feeling completely hopeless and they're only seeing these apocalyptic narratives. And it's we've really got to be considerate of their mental states, especially in my country. It's a big issue here. So, again, we don't want to shy away from the reality of what is going on, but we've got to make sure we get that balance in and remind them that there is hope and there are things we can do, and we can actually have a fundamentally better world on the other side of this. These solutions are incredible that are out there. They restore ecosystems, they provide healthier food, they reinvigorate the way we interact with all living systems. That message has to get out there, especially at the moment where people are losing faith in this system. We're seeing it all around the world. We've seen it through COVID. We've seen the fragility of what we've created, and people are wanting to tell a new collective story. And that's where I think artists this is their moment to step up. It's no better time.
All right, I actually do want to go back to the previous question about adaptation, because I want Cheryl to take a crack at that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was having a little side chat with Amy. What was the question again?
Well, just that there's adaptations that you think are in the pipeline that you would like to see.
Yeah. Well, there are a few. As I said, it seems to be ramping up. The interest is ramping up. There are studios who are actively interested in this material, and we're trying to. Part of our work is to bring studios and studio executives along in that interest. Apple TV, HBO. So basically there are some books that are being adapted. They're nonfiction books, but they're being adapted to fiction TV series. Like, I don't know how I feel about this, but The Uninhabitable Earth does have a green light at HBO Max with Adam McKay attached. Although right now he's working on his new feature, his comedy feature, which is like a metaphor for, you know, looming climate change, which is about a comet coming to the Earth or something. I have other things to say about how metaphors work or don't work. But let's see, there's that. There's the Nathaniel Rich's book has been optioned, seems to be in development over at Apple. The one called Losing Earth, about the story in the 80s about when we could have gone in the right direction and we didn't. An excellent book. That's going to be dramatized. Adaptations. Well, you know, I can't like say, you know, you can't talk specifically about things, but there are people, there's like an open door from at some places for IP, intellectual property, that speaks to the climate crisis in some great, good story way. You know, whether it is coming from fiction, they loved, you know, Hollywood loves to adapt. And so it could be coming from other media, fiction, you know, novels, short stories, and or it could be narrative journalism, like that Nathaniel Rich book, or you know, or people, like people whose life stories, the work that they're doing in the world, you could you know, create a story around that. And so there are channels for developing these sorts of projects, and their doors are opening, which is a very hopeful sign.
That's the Uninhabitable Earth, boy. Yeah, and that's that's going to be a good one to follow.
What's Adam McKay going to do with that?
I know.
I'm sort of fascinated.
Ricky Gervais will be the lead or something.
What?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I got a question here that I want to, like, I think I want most of the panel to take a crack at, if not the whole panel. And as a fan of movies and TV shows, sometimes I think of how they've been based on books and such, and how they've taken liberties with the book, and like, wow, they really made a great decision to leave that out. But when it comes to climate change, what responsibility do you feel that, you know, the filmmakers and the writers have to be with the latest climate science when they're writing these things? And, you know, it doesn't even necessarily have to be about the overall issue. Okay, humans are responsible for climate change, but you drill down to like, all right, sea level rise. Well, is that 50 years, 20 years? Like, there's all sorts of science up and down the chain when it comes to this. What responsibilities do filmmakers have, and, you know, people doing TV in regards to the science? And, you know, Rhoda, let's start with you.
Sorry, I'm not sure I really understand the question. You mean
like, how consistent? What is the responsibility of, let's say, writers or filmmakers to, you know, stay abreast of the latest climate science when they're doing their work? And I guess if I was trying to make an earlier point, saying sometimes taking liberties to get the story across, I understand, but what responsibilities are there to, you know, be consistent?
I really think the science has to be right. Like, you can be creative as much as you like with the rest of the plots, with the rest of the things that is going on in your film. You can make it as appealing as you want with the other things, but the science has to be right. If we want to make a positive impact, if we want to inspire people, the science has to be right. Definitely. And it doesn't take that much. Really, you just have to consult with the right experts, and we do that all the time for the other things. We try to find information for other issues, like even dog training. If your character is based in someone like Cesar Millan, for example, you'll talk to a dog trainer. Well, talk to an expert on climate change and make sure that the facts you put into fiction are right.
All right, great. Damon, how about you? You're a documentary filmmaker. How's that process for you?
Yeah, I mean, especially the documentary, I think in this particular moment, it is more important than ever that things are fact-checked and cross-referenced, and that what you're putting out is genuinely authentic. And, you know, even though it had some good points to it, I just think of Michael Moore's recent film and what a blow that was to so many people that have been doing the right thing in this movement. And it just sort of really painted a brush across the whole environmental movement. And there was some horrific science in that around the efficiency of solar panels and whatnot. And It's very frustrating when you see that, because I think filmmakers have a responsibility, a huge responsibility in the moment, to tell the truth. And so that was one of the biggest aspects of us. We had it fact checked by almost 100 different academics from both sides, or from all around the world, to make sure that it was robust, because we knew the responsibility that people would see this, children would see this. And especially if you're going to push a premise of fact-based streaming, you're going to make sure the facts are correct. So yeah, I really agree with everyone here. I think we have a responsibility to tell the truth more than ever.
All right, Amy, I want you to take a crack at that. I think I've asked you that question before in regards to, climate novels and climate fiction, the, commitment to using the right and latest science.
Yeah, I'm actually of two minds about it. I mean, I think on the one hand, as long as the very high level of science is right, that's important. I mean, there's a reason why A Day After Tomorrow isn't really upheld as a great work of climate fiction and film. Is because the premise and the science of that movie is so ridiculous and isn't rooted in real life. But that said, if just telling people the science of climate change was going to change how they think about climate change, then it already would have, because the science, widespread disinformation campaigns by the fossil fuel companies aside, the science is out there and it is available to be read. But in terms of storytelling, I think that the focus doesn't even really need to be on science. I think it's more important to get the irrationality of human behavior right. That's what we need to get right. The irrationality of our continued reliance on fossil fuels, even though we are destroying the earth to take it out, put it into the atmosphere, and further destroy the biosphere, the very thing from which we derive all value. That's what we need to get across in potent, clear storytelling. Whether the seas are going to rise by 5 feet at the end of the century or 20 feet, I think it's going to make a lot less of a difference to most audiences.
All right.
I'm going to jump in here if I may.
Yeah, Cheryl, please do.
Okay. Yeah, this is so great. I really do agree with everything everyone is saying. As I kind of mentioned in my little presentation there, one of the things that has been really fun for me is to experiment with, as an artist myself, and in sort of working with other artists, is like, how does this information, this factual information, get processed through your creativity, through your creative voice, through your storytelling genius? What comes out the other end? And it's like, it's like to be exposed to the facts and data and research is important, but some writers are better with research than others, and so for me, it's really exciting to work that way. And so and then to have resources like what Rhoda offers and what we offer at NRDC and what other organizations like Hollywood Health and Society offer is like a check, if you would like to have your content checked, if you would, to make sure that it's accurate on screen, then we offer those experts for you to consult with. But I wanted to speak to your point, Doug, about world building future stories. Like there's a number of futures that we have in front of us. I recently worked with a show that is trying to, it's like telling stories of our future influenced by climate over the next 100 years. And each episode will be moving ahead in time to show people and how some area of the globe, the climate crisis is affecting them at that point. And they wanted to know what our trajectory is into the future. And that is really hard, as you say, Doug. It's like, well, it really depends on the choices that we make all along the way. And I strongly agree with what everyone else has been saying, that we need to give the creative folks the information that it could go different ways, and that it could be really exciting and fun to tell stories that show the more positive futures, as well as the dystopic ones that we're so used to. But it's like also showing, making the connection of how we got there, how did we get there? In Interstellar, they can't grow any food, but there's never any mention of why. How do we get there? The attribution piece, connecting it to our time now, is a really, to me, important storytelling message to get across.
All right, some great answers. And I guess, Cheryl, following up on your point too, in my own experience, scientists and policymakers, they do something called scenario planning. You know, people do it in different fields, but they come together and they bring out all these different scenarios. And sometimes these scenarios are really extreme, but the purpose of it is to give multiple scenarios to let people know that this is potentially in the realm of possibility. How is that going to affect your decision making today? And in its own way, that's sort of like a scriptwriter sort of going on the extreme end of the science. And so it's actually used within those people. You don't make things completely up, but I see the similarities in this process of scenario planning that you might do as a screenwriter. So if it makes a story more effective, I think you should potentially do it. All right, so we're heading toward the end here. And there's a question here I want to ask, and then I want to do a wrap-up question to everybody. And not necessarily everybody can, if they want to answer this question, but I think this is from you originally, Cheryl, is that David Wallace Wells, who was mentioned earlier, The Uninhabitable Earth, among others, has posited that it's hard to tell stories about climate because there are no bad guys in the story. The bad guys are all of us living our unsustainable lives. Do you agree with this assertion? I think, oh, that's very provocative, and that, like, who do you make the bad guy in a movie, which you could relatively easy, but who wants to take a crack at that? Maybe let's start off.
I'll have to take the first stab.
All right.
Yeah. Yes, he's right to a degree that we are all complicit in this because we've created a system that relies so heavily on these fossil fuels. But I think most of us would be aware that, I mean, you just have to read Jane Meyer's book, Dark Money, or you look at some of the internal memos from Exxon or Shell back in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, they all knew that this was happening. Their own scientists did this forecasting, and yet they chose to double down and continue to push this message. And I remember I've even read memos at Exxon where they were having a debate about whether to switch to renewables. This is in the early 90s. And they decided that it would actually be more lucrative for their company to continue the fossil fuel extraction than to switch to the renewables because the technology wasn't available yet. So to me, that's a pretty clear villain in this story. Things could look very, very different right now. We've had 30 years of deliberate propaganda, deliberate misinformation, and they have created a barrier to our genuine progress. So I would say that that is a very obvious first take. And then I also look at some governments around the world that have also known this for a long time, especially in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, that due to lobbying, due to the lack of transparency in our political systems, that we haven't implemented this stuff. We haven't listened to the science in the way that we should have. So I think when you do look, there are very obvious targets, but I agree that we've got to be careful with that because, yes, all of us have a responsibility, but things could have moved a lot faster had certain people got out of the way. That's my take.
Okay, well, I want to get to the other ones, but there was a comment from Alyssa, the newer Muppets movie where the villain was the oil company, so leave it to the Muppets to simplify things. So, Rhoda, do you want to take a crack at that, the idea of like who the bad guys are?
I think since it's such a complex scenario, and like Damon said, we are all complicit, that makes it even more interesting because we are all complicit. So finding the conflict and finding the, like Amy said, the rationality of some of our actions, the powers at stake, that is a source of inspiration for many interesting plots. There is not just one evil person responsible for all this that we can all hate and go against, but we are all part of the problem. So that is even more of a conflict for me, no? We are not moving between black and white. We're in a gray area, big gray area, where all need to take responsibility. And some people have done more damage, or some companies or governments have done more damage than others, but we're all part of this. So it makes it very interesting to actually find the different stories on. It's not about blaming, it's also about how do we get out of this situation, no, and move forward, knowing what we've done and the responsibility that we have. So I'm usually very comfortable in gray areas. I find it very interesting to explore.
Great. Well, Amy, I want to hear from you.
Sure. Well, I love that Muppet movie example because, you know, the fossil fuel industry is an enormous villain in this story, the real life story and potentially in fictional stories. But beyond that, I mean, I think a couple of points to keep into consideration, especially when we're talking about movies trying to motivate people to think, you know, more progressively about climate change, is that, you know, psychology, you know, studies show that when stories frame the, maybe not the villain, but, you know, the cause of climate change as all of us, it's paralyzing, because what do you do with that? I mean, there's no outside of that. So I think that whoever the villain is, it can't be all of us. And, you know, I think that's true in the real world too. You know, everybody on this panel does not have the same, you know, degree of villainhood as the fossil fuel companies. So that needs to be in consideration. But the other thing too about this is that so often in movies, a couple of recent ones that come to mind, First Reformed, which I loved, or Affinity War, which everybody saw, the villains were essentially eco-terrorists. The people who care about environmentalism were depicted as the villains. And so that's something else that I think really needs to be a part of this conversation about stories adapted for the big screen.
So Thanos was Paul Ehrlich. I see. I didn't even make the connection. So Cheryl, I want you to take a, you know, the last crack at that question.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up that Thanos thing, because yeah, it's like they're struggling. You can see that they're struggling in Hollywood with this idea of who's the villain. I mean, there's all the James Bond movies, half of them, the villain was going to kill off most of the population to save the world. You know, like we all see that as a twisted logic that it could only exist in a sociopath's mind, right? So, or a psychopath's mind. So that's why he or she is a villain. But I think that it represents a lack of awareness and education among the creatives about the kinds of solutions. Like population control is not a solution. It's not really a viable solution, and let's not go there. It may be where sort of logic takes you. But what if we change the way we consume, you know? Or what if we, there's been studies that show that we actually have enough. There is plenty of, food or whatever that we need if we manage it wisely, if we build a circular economy where we're not just destroying and sucking and overusing everything from the earth and depleting it. That's why we can't support 6 or 7 billion people. So if there's just a little bit more education about the actual solutions, the actual philosophies and visions about, you know, what's going wrong here and how to fix it, that could help develop some different kinds of villains or whatever. And I just also want to point to something that Rhoda said about the gray areas and how really interesting stories, especially in literature, you know, the villain is internal, like it's the antagonist is the bad impulses of the main character or whatever. And I often think of this story, you know, the guy Ray Anderson, who is sort of a pioneer in sustainability, and he ran a carpet company, a large carpet company, basically unaware really of the impact that the carpet industry, which are based on fossil fuels, are having on the world, on the earth, until he read Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown or something, some book of Paul Hawkins back in the day. And then it suddenly opened up his eyes, and then he looked at his granddaughter and he thought about the world that he and his business was leaving for her, and he calls it this spear in the chest awakening. And he decided to completely redo his way of doing business, and he's became a leader in sustainable economics and how you can transform your industry to be less polluting. That's a great story, and it's about a person who has like a personal awakening about what their impact and what they can do. And you know, and it's nobody. The thing that's the bad guy is the view and the attitude that he has, that he's inherited from the world, you know, like the business world and so on.
All right, great. Ray Anderson, legend. I actually met him, helped me get a job when I moved to Australia. He connected me to the EPA there. So I much appreciated to Ray Anderson. All right, so guys, we need to wrap this up and we need to do this relatively quickly in the next few minutes, but I want each of us, each of you guys to leave a call to action or maybe just some observation, but we need to keep these relatively short to kind of wrap this up in 3 or 4 minutes, but let's just jump right into it. So Rhoda, some sort of call to action or final thoughts?
Yes, just a reminder that we do have a great responsibility because we reach a lot of public and we can create role models, we can inspire them, we can provide solutions. And it's time that our content actually makes that difference. So yes, either if it's with the Dante movement or with programs like Cheryl's at the NRDC, and let's get together as an industry, as creators, as filmmakers, as part of this world's culture to actually make that positive impact.
Awesome. All right, Amy, let's go with you.
Sure. I guess it's just that for all industry people out there, remember that a lot of the psychological and sociological studies on the power of storytelling are out there. Read them. There are already stories about climate change that are impacting readers in incredible ways. Read those, adapt them for the big screen, and listen to what the NRDC Rewrite the Future program is doing because they're incredible.
Awesome. Cheryl, final thoughts really quickly.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Yeah, so I guess I would leave with this message that is to say to people that, you know, what if you could change the world just by going to work, you storytellers? What if you could change the world just by doing what you already do in a slightly different way, to create, you know, change-making narratives that shift the cultural zeitgeist on climate. Yeah, you could help build the movement. So please find out more.
Awesome. And Damon, we'll wrap up with you.
I'll just finish quickly with one of my favorite quotes. It's from Terence McKenna, and he said that the role of the artist is to save the soul of mankind, and anything else is a dithering while Rome burns. If the artist can't find the way, then the way cannot be found.
All right, very nice. Okay, so that is it, all the time we have for the discussion. Thanks to all the panelists. You guys have been fantastic. And so I want to hand this over, and I want to also thank the opportunity to moderate this panel. This has been a lot of fun, but I'm going to hand this over to wrap things up with Randy Cruz from Sim International. Randy, you out there?
I am. Looks like you can hear me. I can hear myself echoing a little bit. I just wanted to begin by thanking all of the panelists and everybody who has attended today. I have found this to be an incredibly inspiring experience, genuinely inspired by all of your work. Very excited to watch 2040. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I just wanted to say that at SIM, we are really passionate about climate change solutions and advancing clean power solutions. So, you know, the way we make movies is as important as the stories that we're telling through them. So let's continue to really push for changes that need to happen at a structural level, at a policy level, to make it even easier to access clean power and make diesel generators a thing of the past. And just, I really wanted to echo, I heard a lot today about the psychology of climate change. And I will say that I had clearly found my tribe because I haven't heard anybody else outside of this group talk about the psychology of climate change before. So it's a breath of fresh air. It is so important. We have got to get away from naming and shaming. And I really encourage, and I know you've all done this, learn about the work that's going on in psychology of climate change. My mentor has been Renee Lertzman on this. I popped her name in the chat box, and I really encourage you to have a look at her work. And so I've got 1 minute left. Just with my final call to action would be to echo 3 of her recommendations, and that is 1, and Amy, you talked about this, really attuning to the authentic emotion that we experience as storytellers and that our audiences are experiencing. It's not a black and white issue. And 2, you know, Rhoda and Cheryl, you both talked about this. Let's be really specific in modeling the changes that we want to see happen. We got to get beyond raising awareness about climate change and really not be afraid of talking about the policy changes that need to happen, the systems level changes that need to happen. This is not a political issue, and we need to take the politics out of it. And then just finally, Damon, you talked about this in our work, in the narratives that you're creating, create hubs for ongoing communities around these stories so that we can sustain interest, we can build an ongoing culture of advancing solutions for climate change in all communities. So I really hope that you will all be available to join us on the next SPF date, October 22nd. And just thanks to everybody again for joining us today. It's truly been an honor. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.